My name is Tyler Nakamura. I was born in Santa Cruz, California in 1986. As a Japanese American, I have experienced very little racial discrimination growing up in a multicultural environment like the Bay Area. But the Bay Area has not always held this optimistic attitude, accepting different cultures. In school, I have always learned about the early 1900s when many different races experienced racial antagonism and segregation that would be considered horrific today. My family has been living in the Bay Area ever since my great-great-grandparents journeyed to America from Hawaii in 1906, hoping for a better life. I have always wondered about my ancestors' experiences during this time. I want to learn more about my grandparents' experience growing up in the United States and how they feel about their past.
I was born in Cupertino on April 5th, 1926. I am a second generation Japanese American. My mother and father were both born in Fukuoka, Japan. When I was about 1 year old, we moved to Alameda. Also, my grandparents and their kids all moved to Alameda, and they started a grocery store, and my mother and grandmother made tofu, and my father did gardening 3 days out of a week. Well, as for my farm life, before the war, I used to spend about a month and a half, 2 months in Berryessa working for my great uncle's farm. And when we went to camp, well, there I didn't get paid. They just because I was just over there to help, and I was pretty young yet then, anyhow. As for the farm in eastern Oregon, in Graybill, Wyoming, the farm was run by Mr. Mobley. He was a real nice man. In fact, the whole family was really nice to us. And we were there a month. I think I made about $100. And as for Eastern Oregon, which is a place called Jameson, and it's about I would say about a half-hour, 1 hour drive from Nisa, not Nisa, Ontario, which is the biggest town, and that was right on the almost right on the Idaho border. Over there, now the beets were maybe 3 times as big as Wyoming, and the onions were pretty good size, and we went to also help pick potatoes at a neighboring farm. As for picking potato, you're out there just before daylight, and you pick tomato. You put the potatoes in a sack, about a half a sack, and then you stack it up. And we only could work till about 10 o'clock because it got too hot. And we would swamp those potatoes onto the truck and deliver to the dehydrator over in Jameson. And as for beet topping and onion, I was there about 2 months, and I was able to make around $1,000. So I did pretty good in Eastern Oregon, and that was a lot of money, $1,000 in about 2 months.
My name is Rosie Mariyama, and I was born in San Jose, California on August 14, 1930, and I'm third generation Japanese American. My grandparents were from Kumamoto, Japan, and they moved to Hawaii, and they wanted to work in the sugar canes and the pineapple plantations. I grew up at my aunt and uncle's house, and they own a large acreage of prunes. I lived there for a while, and my mom helped with the prunes, dehydrating, drying the prunes and sorting the prunes. And my dad worked on the orchard, cultivating, irrigating, things like that. And then soon after that, well, first of all, the Japanese Americans really weren't hired for any job in a plant or anything. They more or less worked out in the field, maybe raising vegetables and things like that. I attended Campbell Union High School, which is now the Campbell Community Center, and I graduated in 1948.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
When I heard about the bombing of Pearl Harbor from my friends, I didn't think too much about it at that time, but when I got home, I was wondering how my Hagojin friends or white friends will, treat me at school. So, but when I got to school on Monday, everything was just as usual. No one, got after me or blame me for any of that, what happened in Pearl Harbor. So I was lucky that all my white friends didn't do anything about or calling me names or anything like that.
I was visiting my aunt and uncle when the news of Pearl Harbor came over the radio, and I could tell by their faces that they just couldn't, it was disbelief. And I myself, I was only 11 years old, so I knew something was wrong just by their expression.
More than 100,000 men, women, and children, all of Japanese ancestry, removed from their homes in the Pacific Coast states to wartime communities established in out-of-the-way places, different relocation centers in unsettled parts of California, Arizona, Utah.
Well, when the war started, I don't know how long it took, but all the Issei, all the first generation Japanese, had to move out of the Bay Area. If I'm not mistaken, they had to move at least 10 miles inland. And we were lucky that we had relatives in San Jose, so we moved to San Jose. And I don't know, I forgot how long we stayed in San Jose, but I went to San Jose High School for a little while. And then we were told to meet at San Pedro and then the Union Pacific Railroad. And my father trying to sell whatever he can, whatever he had, because we couldn't move any, carry or bring any big items, mostly just our clothes and few smaller items.
When we got the notice, we only had about 1 week notice to move out, and so we had to leave everything, the ranch, the prune orchard, everything, the furniture. Only thing we could take was our clothing. But we did have, my aunt and uncle did have some real good Caucasian friends that said that they would take care, kind of watch over the whole house while we were gone. And then we had to leave our pets. We had, my aunt and uncle had a little, well, it's not little, but they had a pet. It was just a mutt. I don't mean to play it down, but he traveled from San Jose, from Foxworthy, all the way to Auburn, which is about 2.5-hour ride by car. But he showed up in Auburn, California. That was really something. And but we were really grateful to our real good neighbors.
A to what? A, B, C, D, E, F. A and F was the maybe a couple only, or maybe a couple with one children. And well, life wasn't that easy for them. And besides, in Wyoming, it gets awfully cold in the wintertime. In fact, in I think it was in 1943, if I'm not mistaken, it was one of the coldest winter. It went down to 28 below zero in Hart Mountain.
In the barracks where we lived, it was just one huge room, depending on the size of your family, but it was just one room. So we had to partition it with blankets so that the boys in the family and the rest of the family could have a little privacy. Had a big pot-belly stove. There was no heating, and so there was a big pot-belly stove that we used charcoal with. And the washroom and the the washroom and the shower, everything had to be, it was one central place where all the barracks in that block had to share. And then we had the mess hall, which was not too far away, and my mother worked there at the mess hall.
One thing about if you were in camp, if you could get the pass to go outside and work in any part of United States except California, Washington, and Oregon, which is by the Pacific Ocean. We also, you could get a permanent pass or seasonal pass. There was no problem getting that, as long as you're, I think it was 18 years or older. Except the time we went to Graybull, Wyoming, I was only 16, but I don't know, I got a pass to go out. And I've been in and out of camp with my pass, no problem. Once you get the pass, you can go out and come back. But when you come back with the permanent pass, you had to pay so much a day to stay in the camp.
How my parents, how the older folks thought about the war and internment camp. I never heard them complain too much. It's just that they had to leave in such a hurry and leave everything behind. But when it came to the war, I think they felt a little, they didn't think it was right that Japan did what they did. And so there wasn't that much animosity towards the United States. Anyway, that's how of course, I was only 11, 12 years old, so I didn't understand that much, but I never heard my parents say anything real bad about what had happened. In 1990, the United States government gave anyone that was interned in camp or had to move way out in the Midwest somewhere, they gave some restitutions. But of course, it didn't cover any of the losses that the family lost when they had to move out so suddenly. And when we did get the money, I remember my father-in-law telling my husband not to spend the money foolishly, but to use it for educational purposes or anything else that would help the family.
Anyone who was evacuated from the West Coast or wherever got $20,000. And as for me, I was lucky to get that money. Compared to some of the families, they lost a lot. They lost a lot. In fact, they lost their property and things like that. And my folks, I had a grocery store, and a lot of them is they got paid when the customer got paid. So a lot of that money was in the books, and they lost all that when the war started and they had to be evacuated. How we met? Well, I married my good friend's sister. I met her about 58 years ago. I had to go to Fred's house, her brother's, and she answered the door, and that's how we met. And we got married on February, 1954. And we bought our house, our first and only house, on November 1st, 1954. We've been there ever since. and still there, so not much I could add. You got anything to add?
How much you pay for the house?
Well, we paid $15,000 for the house.
We had 3 children, Jill, Kirk, and Kent. And Jill is my oldest daughter. She had Garrett, who went to UC Riverside, and is now working at a bank. And Kelly is she's into art. She's very good. I'm so proud of her. And Tyler went into the service, and he was only 21, and he came out a sergeant, which I'm very proud of. But the most important thing is that he's back here with us.
I've always known that my family's had a rich history growing up in the United States. As a 5th generation Japanese American, obviously my family's acculturated quite a bit to the American lifestyle. I always heard from my grandparents growing up about the 30s and 40s, how they used to run around on farms, and they never complained about anything and told me anything about the internment camps until today. And it's really surprising to hear about all the racial antagonism and about hearing about the internment camps, because you can't see that within themselves today. They're ordinary people. They don't hold any grudges against the United States or anything. And I really feel this reflects their personality and how they like to look on the better sides of things.